Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. A lot of people ask me, Alan, how do you do such deep dives into Star Wars lore? Especially when the films and TV shows give us so little detail about what's going on in the background. Well, to them I would say that is the limitation of the medium. When you mix sound, music, and moving pictures together, you get one of the most powerful ways to get a message and story across. But it's also expensive because there are many moving parts to filming a movie or TV show. And so videos have to be a little less detailed. They have to be a bit shorter so that they can have mass appeal and be streamlined for larger audiences, which will then justify the cost of such productions. But for me, my favorite moments in Star Wars lore isn't always in the films. A lot of times it's what I find in the novels. And in today's video, I want to read to you guys an extremely interesting excerpt from the personal files of Mon Mothma, the political leader of the rebellion. It comes from the novelization of Rogue One. Mon Mothma is well known for her decades-long career within the Republic Senate and then eventually the Imperial Senate, and her steadfast devotion to the Republic and the principles of democracy. But her post-Galactic Civil War adherence to pacifism and demilitarization arguably opened up the door for the First Order invasion, which has tainted her legacy ever since. Now, many people assume that Mon Mothma was just a naive person, a woman in a man's world, a civilian, in what should have been a military role. But as you'll see in this document, Mon Mothma truly understood the dynamics of the battlefield during her era, and she was a student of history and also past conflicts. She also had a brilliant strategic mind. Mon Mothma had paid close attention during the Clone Wars and watched with stoic horror. Many of the lessons that she learned from this conflict would help guide her decisions when she led the Rebel Alliance. Now, the thing we oftentimes forget about Mon Mothma was she rarely allowed the public to see what exactly was going on inside of her head.
I'm a polite, sometimes indecisive senator who spends the days fighting and failing to protect separatist do-gooders, battle Empire overreach. And irritation, as you so harshly put it.
But she didn't just dupe the Empire and Palpatine.
It's a lie. The Mon Mothma people think they know. It's a lie. It's a projection. It's a front. Smile.
She also duped us, the audience. Which makes sense. Mon Mothma was already a seasoned politician by the end of the Clone Wars. She somehow managed to lead an opposition from within the Imperial Senate for more than a decade somehow, and still didn't get imprisoned by Palpatine. She was a spy in plain sight and always eager to play the foolish idealist who was a threat to no one. But the reality was, she was just playing on the ego of Palpatine and his Imperial hound dogs, a strategy that she could use only because she was able to suppress her own ego. Mon Mothma was not only extremely intelligent, she also had the wisdom of a seasoned combat leader. Not only was she in the right place to lead the rebellion, I think without her, the rebels would have definitely failed.
The Clone Wars redefined interstellar conflict, forcing us to grapple with realities we've blessedly forgotten after generations of peace. This was, perhaps, the very worst of war's crimes. They ushered in an age when mass bloodshed was no longer unthinkable, but rather an essential feature of military action.
This wasn't a very astute observation made by Mon Mothma, something that the Jedi and many Republic officers figured out way too late into the war. Just like the young and eager European soldiers who ran towards the battlefields in the days leading up to the beginning of World War I, many young Jedi Knights and their Padawans, along with their clones, had no idea what horrors awaited for them on the battlefields of Geonosis and the hundreds of battlefields that would follow. At the skirmish of Petronakia Arena alone, the Jedi foolishly got themselves surrounded by a numerically superior droid force and lost the majority of their strike force. Out of the 212 Jedi who would land on Geonosis, only 30 would make it out alive. The price of war was something that most people had forgotten thanks to the 1,000 years of peace that the Rusan Reformation had created. But before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, OwnASaber.com. They are the premier sellers of lightsabers on this side of the Hydian Way. OwnASaber.com has some truly unique designs, like the hilarious Last Brick Lego-inspired saber to the more intimidating Huntsman, which is widely used by the Inquisitors. And right now, they also have a great deal for you guys. If you buy 2 sabers from the same collection on their website, you get one of those sabers for 50% off. For instance, you can grab the Wraithbearer from the Padawan collection and pair it with the Assassin X, also from the Padawan collection. Once you add both of these sabers to the cart, the savings will be applied at checkout. Now, if you guys want just one lightsaber, the entire store is still 30% off with free shipping. For more information on this deal, check out the description down below. Also, you guys can use our promo code EWOK, that's all caps, for $15 off. I really recommend you guys check out ownersaber.com. They really have some awesome products. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video.
I've argued that our rebel movement is not a response to the political question of the Clone Wars, and I continue to believe this. Nonetheless, no one can claim that our military doctrine is not largely defined by the desire and the need to do things differently. What worked in the Clone Wars cannot work again. The partnership of Jedi Knights and Kaminoan clone armies constituted a peerless weapon that no longer exists.
The mistake that many institutionalized thinkers make is that they aren't willing to drastically shift their views on how things are done, especially if these are individuals who have personally spent years and years developing and researching new doctrine for the last war. When one arrives from the civilian sector, like Mon Mothma, they bring a lot less baggage, and so they're more willing to throw away ideas and try out new things. And so instead of trying to recreate the Republic military, Mon Mothma simply analyzed the previous conflict and what was going on in the current war and tried to adopt those lessons to the Rebel Alliance.
Consider a brigade of clone troopers served by a Jedi commander. Such a unit might penetrate a world's orbital defenses and seize control over the entire planet while taking and inflicting minimal casualties. I do not mean to understate the role of naval warfare during the last conflict, nor to denigrate the sacrifices of starship pilots and crew who were lost. But what blockade could be thorough enough to keep out a handful of determined starfighters and a single clone dropship? Yes, such blockades existed, and in greater numbers towards the conflict's end, but their cost helped to fracture and bankrupt the nascent separatist government.
Mon Mothma has several good points in this passage here. First, without the Jedi, the military doctrine for the rebellion will need to be drastically different. The Jedi were essentially hero units, and their clones were amongst the most skilled infantry forces the galaxy had ever seen. The rebellion would not have the ability to replicate such a force. Mon Mothma also rightly remembers that in the earlier years of the war, the separatist ability to blockade planets was not that great. The Republic didn't even have access to the Venator-class Star Destroyer during the Battle of Geonosis. The entire invasion fleet was spearheaded by Jedi starfighters, which were then followed by relatively vulnerable Acclamator-class assault ships.
With the Clone Wars' end, the destruction of the Jedi Order, and the decommissioning of the Kaminoan cloning facilities, the self-proclaimed Emperor and his military advisors determined that the future of warfare was in large-scale naval weaponry, in a fleet of battleships and battle stations that could atomize any enemy, whether on a planet's surface or among the stars. They rebuilt a military not for precision strikes, but for hammer blows, a military that could counter the interstellar movement of any mobile infantry that an uprising might field. This was the vile genius of Emperor Palpatine's plan. He knew a rebellion like ours would have difficulty assembling a vast army of ground troops from thousands of oppressed worlds, but his stormtroopers could curtail a local uprising's growth on any single world, and his fleets could decimate spaceborne troops during any attempted landing. No potential rebellion could dare eschew infantry altogether, but lacking the elite support of Jedi or clones, the cost in lives would be abominable. See, for example, the affair of the 61st Mobile Infantry at Ferric Pax. Thus, the importance of the Rebel Navy.
In this paragraph, Mon Mothma uses her inside knowledge of the Imperial military. As an Imperial senator, she would have access to the military budget and more detailed information on military projects. And she was able to come to a conclusion that the new Imperial military would be centered around the Imperial Navy and amassing firepower. She also was smart enough to understand that this new Imperial military was not something the rebellion could take on head first. This explains why Mon Mothma is extremely hesitant to engage the Empire early on during the Alliance to restore the Republic period. Saw Gerrera, one of the more short-sighted and hot-headed individuals that was a part of the wider rebel network for a period of time, would oftentimes clash with Mon Mothma on this very issue.
You continue to allow this war to be fought on the Empire's terms, not yours, You are going to lose.
Even Luther and Rael would criticize Mon Mothma for not being willing to do what was necessary to fight the Empire. And it was Mon Mothma who had to keep these more aggressive members of the coalition in check. And at the same time, she didn't force the members of the Alliance to restore the Republic to engage the enemy until they were ready themselves to do it. Yes, Mon Mothma didn't want to be a dictator, but she also understood the heavy price any rebel force would pay if they went head-on against the Empire. And therefore, she wanted the individual faction leaders to actually support the idea and volunteer their forces instead of being forced into action. Being forced to fight in a disastrous defeat might lead to the complete collapse of the Alliance to restore the Republic, but if the faction leaders were in on the plan in the first place, there is the possibility for the Rebel Alliance to regroup. It was Mon Mothma's patience and understanding of the Imperial military that allowed her to reserve the rebellion's strength until the critical moment on Scarif, which led to the massive rebel victory on Yavin 4. The rebellion really only had one shot, and Mon Mothma made sure that they spent it wisely on a battle that was truly important.
While the Empire constructed its behemoth star destroyers and its TIE fighter swarms, another fleet was forming in less mechanistic fashion. In the early years of what would become our rebellion, there was little coordination among insurgent cells, yet each on its own understood the need to obtain starships for military strikes and transport. A retooled freighter here, augmented with illegal weapons salvaged from separatist wrecks, a pirate corvette there, donated by a sympathetic underworld contact, a handful of starfighters stolen in a daring raid on an Imperial base. As insurgent factions in different sectors began to coordinate and share resources, new challenges arose. One TIE fighter is little different from another. Its mechanisms and its pilots can be swapped with ease when repairs or injuries warrant. Not so with the variety of ships flying for our rebel cause. Staffing and maintaining a patchwork fleet is a task that under less expert leadership, I do not include myself, should have been impossible. Rebel captains proposed a threefold solution to our challenge. First, an underground pipeline was to be established through which both smugglers and legitimate merchants would obtain and distribute badly needed starship parts. This distribution network would need to rival those of some of the Republic's larger corporations to operate effectively. The assistance of former separatist advisors would ultimately prove invaluable. Second, pilots would be encouraged to coordinate and learn from one another and to train on as many types of ships and simulators as possible. This would not only allow skilled pilots to be placed on new vessels should their personal spacecraft be destroyed, but also prove vital for multi-ship engagements. As Admiral Radis puts it, no one wants to fly in formation with a stranger. Third, rebel leadership would expend whatever resources were required to obtain additional starfighter squadrons. These efforts would cost credits and lives, and the details must remain confidential for now. Nonetheless, our access to X-Wing fighters in particular is testament to our success.
In this larger section, we see that Mon Mothma was also involved in helping set up starfighter doctrine, recruitment, and procurement. She seems to understand the importance of logistics when assembling such a hodgepodge starfighter corps. Mon Mothma knew that the rebellion had to adjust its doctrine to fit its very unorthodox fleet and personnel situation. And although the system didn't work perfectly, it held together long enough to give the rebellion time to grow.
As our rebellion gained visibility, new opportunities arose as well. The arrival of the Mon Calamari city ships was a shocking, and perhaps given our limited effectiveness against the occupation of Mon Cala, undeserved boon, emphasizing the significance of winning the hearts of the galaxy's civilians above all else. Over time, leaders like Radis and General Merrick performed a startling feat, transforming what might have amounted to a pirate armada into a genuine fighting force. We've long since known that our pilots, crews, and commanders can easily match the skill and bravery of their Imperial counterparts. What remains to be tested is whether our vessels can engage in a full-scale fleet battle and triumph against a technologically superior opponent. My hope is that such a test is never needed, but if the day does come, I believe we will emerge victorious.
Ultimately, despite Mon Mothma's very cautious behavior, she was an optimist at heart, and she truly believed the rebellion had a chance to win the war. It wasn't a fool's optimism, though. It was backed by her understanding of the wider galactic political dynamics at play. She had stayed in the Imperial Senate as long as she could safely do so. She had seen how bureaucratic and slow-moving the Empire was, and how uninterested the average Imperial official was at doing their jobs correctly. Seeing the rebellion she had worked so hard to create energized her, and as pieces began to fall together, she realized that the hearts and minds strategy that she had created would ultimately work. See, Luthen Rael taught Mon Mothma a very important lesson early on during the struggle.
The Empire has been choking us so slowly we're starting not to notice. The time has come to force their hand.
You see, the longer the rebellion survives, the more damage it will do to the Empire. The more damage it does to the Empire, the more tyrannical the Empire will get trying to defeat the rebellion. And the more throats the Empire steps on, the more recruits the rebellion will have. And so, as you can see, this was never really Luke or Leia or even Han Solo's rebellion. It was always Mon Mothma's all along.